The lunch rush at the Belmont had finally died down. Eliza Morgan wiped her brow with the back of her hand and rolled her tired shoulders. 6 hours on her feet and she still had the dinner shift to go. The restaurant's crystal chandeliers cast soft light across the polished marble floors, creating an atmosphere of elegance that attracted the city's wealthiest people. To them, she was just another face in a black uniform, carrying their plates and refilling their glasses. What they didn't know, what nobody here knew, was that 3 years ago, Eliza had been someone else entirely. "Table 12 needs their check," called Vince, another server who had been working at the Belmont since it opened. He gave her a sympathetic look. "You okay? You look beat." "I'm fine," Eliza said, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about doing this all over again in 2 hours." She pulled out her order pad and headed to table 12, where a group of businessmen in expensive suits were finishing their coffee. As she approached, one of them made a joke that sent the others into loud laughter. They barely acknowledged her as she set down their check. "Whenever you're ready," she said politely, but they continued their conversation as if she weren't there. This was how it always went. The invisible girl with the order pad. Sometimes Eliza wondered if these people ever really saw the person behind the uniform. Did they notice that her hands were not just those of a waitress? That her fingers were long and nimble, built for something more than carrying trays and punching orders into the computer system? Once those hands had been magic. After her shift ended, Eliza had 40 minutes to grab something to eat before returning for dinner service. She sat in the staff room unwrapping a sandwich she'd brought from home, when Mr. Patterson, the restaurant owner, walked in carrying a large vase of flowers. "These just came in for the Whitmire party tonight," he said, setting them on a side table. "Make sure they're placed at the center table before 7, please." "Will do," Eliza replied, watching as he hurried back out. The Whitmire party. She'd forgotten about that. Once a month, the Belmont hosted fancy dinner parties for the city's most powerful families. Tonight was the Whitmires' turn. Old money, big influence, and, according to Vince, terrible tippers despite their wealth. Eliza checked her phone and saw 3 missed calls from her mom. With a sigh, she called back. "Hey, Mom. Lizzie. I've been trying to reach you all day. How are you holding up?" Eliza closed her eyes. "I'm fine. Just busy with work." "Do you know what day it is?" her mother asked softly. Of course she knew. How could she forget? 3 years ago today, her father had died suddenly of a heart attack, just 2 weeks before she was supposed to leave for Juilliard, the day everything changed. "I know, Mom," she said quietly. "I've been thinking about him. He would have wanted you to keep playing, you know." Eliza's throat tightened. "I have to go. My break's almost over. Will you come over this weekend? We could talk about—" "I'll try. Love you, Mom." She hung up before her mother could say more about the piano, about music, about the life Eliza had walked away from. The dinner shift started, and the Belmont filled with its evening crowd. Men in tailored suits, women wearing jewelry that cost more than what Eliza made in a year. The noise level rose as people arrived for the Whitmire party, gathering in the private dining room where a small stage had been set up. Eliza was assigned to help with their table. As she arranged water glasses, she couldn't help but notice the baby grand piano that had been wheeled onto the stage. It was sleek and black, its lid propped open, waiting. Her heart skipped. She hadn't touched a piano in 3 years. Not since the funeral. Not since she'd called Juilliard to decline her spot, sold her own piano to help with her father's medical bills, and picked up job applications instead of sheet music. "Earth to Eliza," said Rosa, one of the other waitresses. "You're staring at that piano like it might bite you." Eliza blinked. "Sorry, just wondering who's playing tonight. Some hotshot pianist Mr. Patterson hired. Apparently he's played at Carnegie Hall or something." Rosa shrugged. Rich people love that classical stuff. Once that stuff had been Eliza's whole world. From age 5, when her father first sat her at a piano, music had been as natural to her as breathing. By 12, she was winning competitions. By 17, she was being scouted by the best music schools in the country. Her father, a music teacher at the local high school, had been so proud. And then he was gone, leaving behind medical bills, a mortgage her mother couldn't afford on her librarian's salary, and a daughter with dreams suddenly too expensive to chase. The Whitmire party grew louder as more guests arrived. Eliza moved efficiently between tables, filling wine glasses, serving appetizers, and keeping a polite smile fixed on her face even when the guests spoke around her rather than to her. "I heard the pianist tonight is incredible," said one woman in a red dress. "Apparently he trained in Vienna." "Vienna?" scoffed her companion. "Is that still impressive these days?" "My nephew studied in Moscow." Eliza bit her tongue. She wanted to tell them that it didn't matter where you studied. What mattered was how the music lived inside you, how it moved through your fingers and into the world. At exactly 8 o'clock, Mr. Patterson clinked a glass for attention and welcomed everyone to the event. The crowd applauded politely, then settled in for the dinner service to begin. "And now," Mr. Patterson announced, "we are honored to have with us tonight the renowned pianist, Anton Velikov, who will play during your meal." More polite applause as a tall man with silver hair at his temples approached the piano. Eliza watched from the corner where she was preparing to serve the first course. Her hands trembled slightly and she steadied them against her apron. Anton sat at the bench, adjusted it slightly, and then placed his hands on the keys. Without any sheet music, he began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune. The familiar notes floated through the room, and something inside Eliza cracked open. She knew this piece by heart. Her father had taught it to her when she was 14. She had played it at her Juilliard audition. As Anton played, Eliza found herself counting the microseconds between certain notes, noticing when his interpretation differed from what she would have done. His technique was flawless, but there was something missing, something that made the difference between playing the notes correctly and making them sing. She realized she had stopped moving, the tray of salads growing heavy in her hands. Rosa nudged her. "Those aren't going to serve themselves," she whispered. Eliza nodded and began circling the table, placing salads in front of guests while Anton continued to play. As she worked, the music followed her, wrapping around her like an old friend calling her home. When she reached the far side of the room, she stumbled slightly, almost dropping a plate. No one noticed except for a young man sitting alone at a small table near the wall. He looked at her curiously, then glanced at the pianist, then back at her. She hurried away, embarrassed. The rest of the first course went smoothly, and by the time they were clearing plates for the main dish, Anton had moved on to Chopin. The rich, complex notes of a nocturne filled the space, and Eliza found herself moving in time with the music, her steps falling naturally into its rhythm. Later, as dessert was being served, Anton took a short break. He stepped outside, presumably for some air, and Eliza found herself drawn to the empty piano. No one was watching. They were all engaged in conversation, champagne flowing freely. Before she could think better of it, she approached the stage and stood beside the magnificent instrument. Up close, she could see the perfection of its polished surface, the ivory and ebony keys waiting patiently. Her fingers itched. Just one touch, she thought. Just to remember. She glanced around quickly, then sat on the bench, careful to keep her uniform from making noise against the leather. She didn't press any keys that would draw attention, but she positioned her hands over them, feeling the ghost of music that wasn't there. "You play?" The voice startled her so badly she nearly fell off the bench. It was the young man who had noticed her earlier, standing at the edge of the stage with a curious expression. "No," she said quickly, standing up. "I mean, not anymore. I was just curious." He tilted his head. "You looked like you knew what you were doing. The way you were watching Anton earlier, I thought maybe I should get back to work," Eliza said, stepping away from the piano. "Enjoy your evening, sir." As she hurried back to the kitchen, her heart pounded in her chest. For one brief moment, sitting at that piano, she had felt like herself again. Not the waitress in the black uniform, but Eliza Morgan, the girl who once made music that could stop time. By the end of the night, her feet ached and her back hurt from hours of standing and carrying heavy trays. But it wasn't the physical exhaustion that weighed on her as she hung up her apron. It was the weight of the music she'd heard, the memories it had stirred, and the ache of something lost. As the cleaning staff moved through the empty restaurant, Eliza found herself alone in the private dining room. The piano still sat on the stage, quiet now. Everyone else was busy in other areas, counting tips or wiping down tables. She approached it slowly, as if it might disappear if she moved too quickly. This time she sat down with purpose, her back straight, shoulders relaxed, just as her father had taught her. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Just one song, she thought, just to remember. She pressed down gently, and the first notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata filled the empty room. The sound was so unexpected, so perfect, that tears sprang to her eyes. Her fingers remembered everything her mind had tried to forget, the pressure needed for each key, the subtle shifts in tempo, the way the melody needed to breathe. She played softly at first, then with growing confidence as the music took over. For those few minutes, she wasn't a waitress with aching feet and a double shift. She was just Eliza, the girl who could make a piano sing. When the last note faded, she sat in silence, hands resting in her lap. The peace that washed over her was something she hadn't felt in 3 years. That was beautiful. She jumped up, spinning around to find Mr. Patterson standing in the doorway, a stack of menus in his hands. How long had he been there? "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I shouldn't have—" He shook his head, stopping her. "Why didn't you tell me you could play like that?" Eliza looked down at her hands, then back at the piano. "It's not part of my job." "No," Mr. Patterson said thoughtfully. "I suppose it isn't." He didn't say anything else, just nodded and continued on his way. Eliza stood there for a moment longer, her heart racing. Then she turned off the lights and left the piano in darkness, walking away just as she had 3 years ago. But this time, the music followed her home. 3 days had passed since Eliza's late-night moment at the piano, and she couldn't stop thinking about it. The feeling of the keys beneath her fingers had awakened something she'd tried so hard to bury. At work, she caught herself humming melodies she hadn't thought about in years, her fingers tapping rhythms on the edge of serving trays. "You seem different," Rosa said as they folded napkins before the lunch shift. "Like you're somewhere else half the time." Eliza shrugged. "Just tired, I guess, but it wasn't tiredness. It was the opposite, a kind of wakefulness she hadn't felt in years. The restaurant was especially busy that day. A group of investors was having a lunch meeting in the private dining room, and Mr. Patterson had been fussing over every detail all morning. "These are very important clients," he told the staff during their pre-shift meeting. "The Anderson Group is looking to buy 3 buildings downtown. If they like their experience here, they'll book their celebration dinner with us when the deal closes. That would be a $20,000 event, minimum." Eliza and 2 other servers were assigned to handle the Anderson Group. As she entered the private room with water pitchers, she noticed the piano was still there, pushed against the wall. No one had moved it since the Whitmire party. Her eyes lingered on it for a moment too long. "Focus, Morgan," Vince whispered as he passed her with a tray of bread. "These guys are big shots." The Anderson Group consisted of 6 men and 2 women, all dressed in sleek business attire that probably cost more than Eliza's monthly rent. They spoke loudly about property values and investment returns, barely pausing when the servers approached. One man in particular, with slicked-back gray hair and a gold watch that caught the light with every gesture, seemed to be in charge. The others laughed too hard at his jokes and nodded too eagerly at his opinions. "That's Richard Anderson himself," Vince murmured to Eliza in the service station. "Word is he's worth $500 million. Eliza nodded, unimpressed. She'd served enough wealthy people to know that money and kindness often traveled in opposite directions. The lunch was going smoothly until it was time for the main course. Eliza was carrying a tray with 3 plates, seared salmon with risotto for the women and one of the men, when she approached the table. As she leaned in to set down the first plate, Richard Anderson threw his hand out to emphasize a point he was making, knocking into Eliza's arm. Time seemed to slow down as the tray tilted. Eliza tried to steady it, but it was too late. One plate slid off, sending salmon, risotto, and lemon sauce across the white tablecloth and onto Anderson's expensive suit. The room went silent. "I am so sorry," Eliza said immediately, setting the tray down and grabbing her serving napkin. "Let me help." "Don't touch me," Anderson snapped, pushing back from the table. He stood up, rice grains clinging to his jacket, a splash of yellow sauce creating a Rorschach test on his blue tie. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" Eliza felt her face burning. "It was an accident, sir. You moved your arm when I was— So it's my fault?" His voice rose, filling the small room. The other diners watched, some looking embarrassed, others seeming almost entertained by the drama. "You're saying I caused this?" "No, I just— Get me the manager. Now." He pointed to the door, droplets of sauce flying from his fingertips. One of the other servers slipped out to find Mr. Patterson while Eliza stood frozen, still holding her napkin, aware of every eye on her. Incompetent, Anderson muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. This is what happens when restaurants hire just anybody off the street. The words stung more than they should have. Just anybody, as if that was all she was. Mr. Patterson arrived, his face a mask of professional concern. Mr. Anderson, I can't apologize enough. Please allow us to take care of your dry cleaning bill, and of course your entire lunch is on the house today. Anderson made a show of checking his watch. I don't have time for this. I have a meeting in 30 minutes and now I look like I've been finger painting. We have a steamer in the back, Mr. Patterson offered. Perhaps we could. Forget it, Anderson waved dismissively. Just get me a new meal to go, and I expect more than just a free lunch for this disaster. Mr. Patterson nodded vigorously. Of course, sir, and we'll send a gift certificate for your next visit. While this conversation was happening, Eliza had begun cleaning up the mess, trying to make herself invisible. The other servers brought new place settings and fresh food for everyone at the table. Eliza was about to slip away to the kitchen when Anderson's voice stopped her. She shouldn't be working here, he said to Mr. Patterson, as if Eliza wasn't standing right there, not in a place of this caliber. Before Mr. Patterson could respond, one of the women at the table, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Richard, it was an accident. Your arm hit hers. I saw it. Anderson's face reddened slightly. That's not the point, Helen. The point is proper training and hiring standards. Eliza felt something shift inside her. 3 years of swallowing her pride, of being invisible, of believing that this was all she deserved after giving up on her dreams. It all suddenly felt too heavy to bear. I have a college degree, she said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. What did you say? Anderson asked, his eyebrows lifting in surprise that she would speak. Eliza met his gaze directly. I said I have a college degree. In music performance, I was accepted to Juilliard before my father died. She took a breath. I'm not just anybody off the street. And it was an accident caused by your gesture, not my incompetence. The silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Patterson looked like he might faint. Anderson stared at her for a long moment, then let out a short laugh. Well, I guess they don't teach grace under pressure at music school. He turned to Mr. Patterson. Control your staff, or we'll take our business elsewhere. Mr. Patterson placed a hand on Eliza's shoulder, gently guiding her toward the door. Please wait for me in my office, he whispered. With one last look at Anderson's smug face, Eliza left the room, her hands shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. She'd just talked back to the biggest client of the month. She'd probably just lost her job. In Mr. Patterson's small office, she sat in the visitor's chair, staring at the framed restaurant reviews on the wall. One from the city paper called the Belmont, a perfect blend of tradition and innovation. Another praised its impeccable service. Impeccable service. Eliza almost laughed. Not today. 20 minutes later, Mr. Patterson entered, looking tired. He sat heavily in his chair and loosened his tie. I'm sorry, Eliza said before he could speak. I shouldn't have said anything. It was unprofessional. Mr. Patterson studied her for a moment. How long have you worked here, Eliza? Almost 2 years. And in that time, have you ever spoken to a customer like that? She shook her head. Never. So what made today different? Eliza looked down at her hands, the hands that had once coaxed beautiful music from piano keys and now carried plates and poured wine. I don't know. Something just broke. Mr. Patterson nodded slowly. The other night when I heard you playing the piano, that wasn't just someone who took a few lessons as a kid. That was real talent. Eliza felt her throat tighten. It was a long time ago. Not that long, he leaned forward. Why did you give it up? The question hit her like a physical blow. No one had asked her that directly before. People had assumed she'd made a practical choice after her father's death, and she'd let them believe it. My dad died right before I was supposed to leave for school, she said. There were medical bills and my mom couldn't handle the mortgage alone. My scholarship only covered tuition, not living expenses in New York. I needed to work. She swallowed hard. And I just couldn't play anymore. Not after he was gone. Mr. Patterson was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm not going to fire you if that's what you're worried about. Relief washed over her. Thank you, but I do think you need the rest of the day off. He held up a hand when she started to protest. It's not a punishment. You've been working double shifts for weeks. Take the afternoon. Come back tomorrow with a clear head. Eliza nodded, too drained to argue. As she stood to leave, Mr. Patterson added, "And Eliza? What you said in there about Juilliard, was that true?" "Yes, I see." He seemed to be thinking about something. "Well, get some rest." Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and harsh. Eliza squinted against it as she walked to the bus stop, her uniform tucked into her bag. She felt oddly light, as if confronting Anderson had released something that had been weighing her down. When she got home to her small apartment, she kicked off her shoes and fell onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. On the wall across from her hung a framed photograph of her father, taken during her last recital before he died. He was standing beside the piano, one arm around 16-year-old Eliza, both of them beaming at the camera. "I messed up today, Dad," she said to the empty room, "but I didn't let him walk all over me." You would have liked that part. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, her phone was ringing. It was after 6 and the screen showed Rosa's name. "Hello?" Eliza answered groggily. "Where are you?" Rosa sounded panicked. "The dinner shift started an hour ago." Eliza sat up straight. "Mr. Patterson gave me the day off." "Didn't he tell anyone?" "He's not even here." "He got called away for some family emergency, and he left Vince in charge. And now we're short-staffed, and there's some big charity event happening in the private room in an hour." "Charity event?" "That's not on the schedule. Last-minute booking. Some foundation thing. They're paying double the normal rate, so management said yes. There's supposed to be a pianist performing, but he just called to cancel." "Vince is losing his mind," Eliza frowned. "What do you mean he called to cancel?" "Who's the pianist?" "I don't know, some guy with a foreign name." "Anton something?" Eliza's heart skipped. "Anton Velikov, the pianist from the Whitmire party." "What's Vince going to do?" "No idea, find a playlist?" "But the guests are expecting live music. It's in all the invitations." Rosa lowered her voice. "Listen, can you come in? I know it's your night off, but we're drowning here." Eliza stared at her father's photograph. She thought about Richard Anderson's sneering face, about the way the piano keys had felt beneath her fingers, about the dream she'd packed away. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said, already reaching for her shoes. "You're a lifesaver." Rosa hung up. As Eliza changed back into her uniform, she felt a strange calmness settle over her. The day had been a breaking point. Anderson's cruelty, her own outburst, the revelation about her past. And now, by some twist of fate, the very pianist whose music had awakened her own desire to play again had canceled on the night she was supposed to be off. It felt like more than coincidence. On the bus ride back to the Belmont, Eliza made a decision. She didn't know exactly what would happen when she got there, but she knew one thing for certain. She was tired of being invisible. The evening sun cast long shadows across the street as Eliza hurried toward the Belmont. Her mind raced faster than her feet. She'd left the restaurant just hours ago after the most humiliating moment of her career, and now she was rushing back like it was the most natural thing in the world. When she pushed through the staff entrance, the kitchen was in chaos. Cooks shouted orders, servers darted back and forth with loaded trays, and in the middle of it all stood Vince, normally cool and collected, looking like he might pull his hair out at any moment. "Eliza." Relief washed over his face when he spotted her. "Thank God. Take tables 4 through 7. They've been waiting 10 minutes for drink orders." She nodded, slipping her order pad from her apron pocket and getting to work. For the next half hour, she moved on autopilot, taking orders, delivering drinks, explaining specials. The rhythm of restaurant work was familiar enough that her body could do it, while her mind wandered elsewhere. Specifically, to the private dining room where, in less than 30 minutes, a charity event would begin without its advertised entertainment. Between orders, Eliza caught snippets of conversation about the event. It was a fundraiser for a children's music education program. Several wealthy donors had paid $500 per plate to attend, with the promise of fine dining and a performance by the renowned Anton Velikov. The irony wasn't lost on her. As she delivered a tray of martinis to a corner table, she spotted Rosa hurrying toward her. "The first guests for the charity thing are arriving," Rosa whispered. "Vince is freaking out about the music situation. What's he going to do?" He found some classical playlist on his phone. He's hooking it up to the sound system now, but he knows it's not the same. Rosa glanced toward the private room. Mr. Patterson would never let this happen. Eliza bit her lip. Who's running the event? Is there an organizer? Some lady in a blue dress. She keeps asking about the pianist. Rosa's eyes suddenly widened. Oh no, you don't think— What? The Anderson group. They're here, at the bar. Eliza turned slowly, and sure enough, Richard Anderson and 3 of his colleagues were seated at the marble-topped bar, sipping on what looked like expensive scotch. Anderson's suit was different from the one he'd worn earlier. No trace of salmon or risotto on this one. Why are they here? Eliza hissed. They're attending the charity event. Vince said they donated $10,000. Rosa squeezed Eliza's arm. Just stay away from their section. I'll handle them, but it was too late. Anderson had spotted her. He leaned over to say something to the man next to him, and they both looked in her direction. Eliza felt her face grow hot. She turned away quickly, busying herself with rearranging the water glasses on her tray. For the next 15 minutes, she managed to avoid the bar area entirely. She could feel Anderson's eyes on her whenever she passed through the main dining room, but she kept her head down, focused on her work. Then Vince appeared at her side, his face tense. The event organizer is asking for you. Me? Why? No idea. But she's insistent. She's in the private room. Eliza's stomach knotted. Had Anderson complained about her again? Was she about to be publicly reprimanded in front of the charity guests? With a deep breath, she made her way to the private dining room. The space had been transformed since lunch. White tablecloths covered round tables set with the restaurant's finest china. Fresh flowers filled crystal vases, and soft lighting created an elegant atmosphere. About half the tables were already occupied by guests in formal attire. And there, in the same spot it had been for days, stood the grand piano, its lid raised in anticipation of a performance that wouldn't happen. A woman in a deep blue dress approached her, clipboard in hand. She had silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun and kind eyes behind designer glasses. Are you Eliza? She asked. Yes. Eliza straightened her uniform reflexively. You wanted to see me? I'm Diane Winters, the event coordinator for the Children's Music Foundation. She offered her hand, which surprised Eliza. Most clients didn't shake hands with the waitstaff. Your manager told me about our situation with Mr. Velikov. Eliza frowned. My manager? Mr. Patterson isn't here. Diane looked confused. The young man in charge, Vincent, I believe. He mentioned that you might be able to help us. Understanding dawned slowly. Vince had told this woman about her piano playing. But how did he know? Had Mr. Patterson mentioned it to him? Or had someone overheard her playing that night after the Whitmire party? I don't think I can help, Eliza said carefully. I'm just a server. Diane studied her face. Vincent seemed to think you were quite accomplished on the piano. He said you trained at Juilliard. I was accepted there. Eliza felt a flush creeping up her neck. I never attended. I see. Diane glanced at the empty piano, then back at Eliza. We have 70 guests who paid to hear live music tonight. Music that will fund scholarships for children who couldn't otherwise afford lessons. She smiled softly. Vincent thought you might be willing to play something. Just a few pieces during dinner. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest. I haven't performed in 3 years. But you can play? Could she? The other night at the piano had felt like muscle memory taking over. But to perform in front of an audience, in front of people like Richard Anderson? I don't think— Please, Diane said, lowering her voice. This foundation gives children the chance to discover music when they might never have had the opportunity. Many of them come from difficult backgrounds. Music gives them something to hold on to. The words hit Eliza hard. Music had been her lifeline once, the thing that made sense when nothing else did. After her father died, she'd cut that lifeline, thinking it would hurt less than holding on. She looked around the room at the guests in their expensive clothes, at the piano waiting silently in the corner. Through the doorway, she could see Richard Anderson entering the main dining room, laughing with his colleagues. I'll need a few minutes, she heard herself say. Diane's face lit up. Thank you. The guests will be seated for dinner in about 15 minutes. Would that be enough time? Eliza nodded, already turning away. She walked quickly through the kitchen and out the back door to the small staff area, where employees took their breaks. Pulling out her phone, she called the one person who would understand what she was about to do. Mom, she said when the call connected. I need to ask you something. 5 minutes later, she found Vince by the service bar, loading wine glasses onto a tray. You told the event coordinator I could play piano, she said without preamble. He had the grace to look sheepish. I overheard Mr. Patterson talking about it with the other managers this morning. He said you were some kind of prodigy. He set down the tray and turned to face her. Look, we're in a bind here. These people paid for live music. And after what happened with Anderson today, what about Anderson? Vince lowered his voice. He called Mr. Patterson after lunch and threatened to pull all his business unless you were fired. Eliza felt her stomach drop. And Patterson told him to take his business elsewhere. Vince smiled slightly at her shocked expression. Apparently, he said, the Belmont doesn't let clients abuse staff, no matter how much money they have. Warmth spread through Eliza's chest. Mr. Patterson had defended her, even at the cost of losing a major client. So Anderson showing up tonight, she began, is him trying to save face. He knows he can't miss this charity event. Too many important people here. But he probably thought you'd be gone. Vince picked up his tray again. So are you going to play or not? Eliza took a deep breath. I need to change first. 10 minutes later, she stood in the staff bathroom staring at her reflection. She'd removed her server's apron and black vest, leaving just the white button-down shirt and black pants. She'd undone her tight ponytail, letting her dark hair fall loose around her shoulders. It wasn't formal attire, but it was the best she could do on short notice. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Your father would be so proud. Play for him tonight. Tears pricked at the corners of Eliza's eyes. She blinked them away and straightened her shoulders. When she entered the private dining room again, dinner was being served. The room hummed with conversation and the gentle clink of silverware against china. Diane spotted her from across the room and nodded encouragingly. As Eliza made her way to the piano, she felt rather than saw people beginning to notice her. Conversations paused. Heads turned. At one table, Richard Anderson was mid-sentence when he recognized her. His eyes widened, then narrowed. The woman beside him, Helen from the lunch meeting, followed his gaze and smiled slightly when she saw Eliza. The short walk to the piano felt like the longest journey of Eliza's life. Each step took her further from the person she'd become, and closer to the one she used to be. When she reached the bench, she sat down slowly, adjusting her position with the same care her father had taught her. Back straight, shoulders relaxed, feet positioned at the pedals. The room had gone almost completely silent now. Eliza could feel every eye on her. The waitstaff, the kitchen workers peering through the door, the wealthy guests pausing their meals. For a terrible moment, her mind went blank. 3 years since she'd performed for anyone. 3 years of silence. Then she remembered her father's words from her very first recital when she'd been paralyzed with stage fright. The music isn't in the piano, Lizzie. It's in you. Just let it out. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne Op. 9, No. 2 filled the room, tentative at first, like a voice unused to speaking. But with each measure, her confidence grew. Her fingers remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The delicate balance of pressure and release. The subtle shifts in tempo that gave the piece its emotional resonance. As she played, the world around her faded away. There was no restaurant, no audience, no Richard Anderson with his judgmental stare. There was only the music, flowing from her hands as naturally as breathing. When the final notes of the nocturne faded, Eliza didn't pause. She transitioned seamlessly into Debussy's Clair de Lune, the piece Anton had played at the Whitmire party. But where his version had been technically perfect yet somehow empty, hers came alive with something personal, something that could only be described as heart. She wasn't aware of the tears sliding down her cheeks until one splashed onto her hand. She wasn't thinking about the audience or their reaction. In that moment, she was playing for only one person, her father, who had given her the gift of music and who, she finally understood, would never have wanted her to give it up. The room remained absolutely still as the last notes of Clair de Lune hung in the air. Eliza kept her head bowed, hands resting in her lap, afraid to break the spell by looking up. Then from somewhere to her right, a single person began to applaud. Others joined in, the sound building until it filled the room. Only then did Eliza raise her head. The entire room was on its feet. The guests, the staff, even the kitchen workers who had abandoned their posts to listen. In the back, Vince gave her a thumbs up. His usual cool demeanor cracked by a wide grin. And there, at his table, stood Richard Anderson. his face unreadable as he brought his hands together in what might have been reluctant respect. Diane appeared at Eliza's side, her eyes shining. "That was extraordinary," she whispered. "Would you play one more?" Eliza nodded, turning back to the keys. As the applause died down and people returned to their seats, she felt something shift inside her, a weight lifting, a door opening. With steady hands, she began to play again. This time a piece she had written herself years ago, a melody that had come to her the day after her father's funeral, but that she had never finished. Tonight, somehow, the ending revealed itself to her, note by note, as if it had been waiting for this moment. For the first time in 3 years, Eliza Morgan was exactly where she belonged. Time seemed to stand still as Eliza played her own composition. The piece had no name, she'd never thought to give it one, but it contained everything she'd felt after her father's death. The grief, the anger, the guilt, and finally the small, fragile hope that had kept her going. As her fingers found the final chord, she held it, letting the sound fill the room before slowly lifting her hands from the keys. The silence that followed was complete. For several heartbeats, no one moved or spoke. Then Diane stepped forward, her eyes glistening. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice slightly unsteady, "Eliza Morgan." The applause that erupted was deafening. People rose to their feet again, some dabbing at their eyes with napkins. Eliza stood from the bench, overwhelmed by the response. She gave a small, awkward bow, unsure of the proper protocol after so many years away from performing. "That last piece," Diane said, leaning close to be heard over the continued applause. "What was it called?" Eliza hesitated. "It doesn't have a name. I wrote it after my father died. It's beautiful." Diane squeezed her arm. "Would you be willing to play throughout dinner? We can offer a small fee, of course." Before Eliza could answer, a voice cut through the noise. "I'd like to speak with the pianist." Richard Anderson was making his way toward the piano, his expression unreadable. Eliza tensed, preparing herself for another confrontation. But when he reached her, his demeanor was entirely different from earlier that day. "That was quite impressive," he said, his voice lacking its previous arrogance. "Especially the last piece." "Thank you," Eliza replied cautiously. "I owe you an apology." The words seemed to cost him something. "My behavior at lunch was inexcusable." Eliza wasn't sure how to respond. Of all the things she'd expected from this evening, an apology from Richard Anderson hadn't been one of them. "Helen reminded me that I've been difficult lately." He glanced back at his table where the woman from lunch was watching them. "The truth is, my daughter was a pianist. She gave it up when she went to business school because I told her it wasn't a practical career path." His eyes returned to Eliza. "Hearing you play just now, I wonder if I made a mistake." The vulnerability in his admission caught Eliza off guard. "It's never too late," she found herself saying. "For your daughter to play again, I mean." Anderson nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps you're right." He extended his hand. "In any case, I hope you'll accept my apology." Eliza shook his hand, still somewhat stunned by this turn of events. "I do." "Good." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "If you ever decide to do something more with your talent, call me. I serve on the board of the symphony, and we're always looking for new artists to feature in our community outreach programs." With that, he returned to his table, leaving Eliza staring at the card in her hand. "Well, that was unexpected," Diane said with a small smile. "So about tonight?" "I'll play," Eliza said, still trying to process what had just happened. "No fee necessary. It's for the children's program, right?" Diane's smile widened. "Bless you. Just a few more pieces during dinner would be wonderful, and perhaps something upbeat as people are leaving." Eliza nodded and returned to the piano. As she sat down, she saw Vince giving her a thumbs up from the doorway. Rosa stood beside him, her mouth open in disbelief. Eliza couldn't help but smile. If someone had told her this morning that she'd end the day performing at a charity event and receiving an apology from Richard Anderson, she'd have thought they were crazy. For the next hour, Eliza played a selection of classical pieces, some Chopin, a bit of Mozart, even a Gershwin tune that her father had loved. The music came easily to her, as if the 3-year gap in her playing had never existed. With each piece, she felt more like herself, more like the person she'd been before grief had shut down that part of her life. The guests resumed their dinner, but the atmosphere in the room had changed. Conversations flowed more easily. Laughter seemed more genuine. and many people paused their eating to simply listen when she began a new piece. During a brief break while dessert was being served, Eliza stepped away from the piano to get a glass of water. As she stood by the service station, Rosa rushed over to her. "Why didn't you tell me you could play like that?" she demanded, though her eyes were wide with admiration. "All this time I thought you were just like the rest of us, stuck here because we couldn't do anything else." Eliza smiled sadly. "I was stuck, just not for the reasons you thought." "Well, you're unstuck now," Rosa said firmly. "I saw Anderson giving you his card." "What did he say?" "Something about the symphony's community programs." Rosa gasped. "Are you serious? That's huge. Those positions are really competitive." Before Eliza could respond, Vince appeared with a tray of champagne flutes. "The foundation director wants to make a toast," he explained, nodding toward Diane, who was speaking with a group of guests. "You should grab a glass too, Eliza. I think you're about to be mentioned." Sure enough, when Diane tapped her glass for attention, she immediately sought out Eliza with her eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we enjoy our dessert, I want to take a moment to thank you all for your generous support of the Children's Music Foundation. Tonight we've raised over $50,000 for music education programs in underserved schools." Applause rippled through the room. "I'd also like to extend a special thank you to the Belmont for hosting us on such short notice, and to their extraordinarily talented staff member Eliza Morgan, who stepped in when our scheduled pianist had to cancel." All eyes turned to Eliza, who felt her cheeks warm at the attention. "What you might not know," Diane continued, "is that Eliza's performance tonight is a testament to exactly what our foundation stands for. Music has the power to transform lives, to provide solace during difficult times, and to bring joy to both the performer and the audience. So please raise your glasses to Eliza and to the power of music." "To Eliza," the room echoed, glasses lifted high. Eliza ducked her head, overwhelmed by the moment. She'd come to work today expecting nothing more than another routine shift, and now she was being toasted by some of the wealthiest people in the city. As the evening wound down, Eliza returned to the piano for a final set. She chose more upbeat pieces this time, a lively Schubert impromptu, a playful Beethoven bagatelle, and finally, a jazz standard that her father had often played during Sunday brunches at home. People stopped by the piano as they left, offering compliments and thanks. One elderly woman pressed a $100 bill into Eliza's hand, insisting it was for the foundation when Eliza tried to refuse. Another guest, a distinguished-looking man with salt and pepper hair, mentioned that he taught at the local conservatory and would love to hear her play again sometime. By the time the last guest departed, it was nearly midnight. The waitstaff began clearing tables and the kitchen crew started their end-of-night cleanup. Eliza remained at the piano, playing softly, not quite ready to break the spell of the evening. "Eliza?" She looked up to find Mr. Patterson standing beside the piano. He'd returned to the restaurant at some point during the evening, though she hadn't noticed when. "Mr. Patterson," she said, her hands stilling on the keys. "I didn't know you were back. I arrived during your Chopin nocturne." He smiled warmly. "It seems I missed quite a day." "You could say that. Vince filled me in on everything, the Anderson incident, the canceled pianist, your performance." He shook his head in apparent amazement. "I knew you were talented from what I heard the other night, but this was something else entirely." Eliza didn't know what to say. After years of keeping her music locked away, hidden even from herself, having it so publicly acknowledged felt strange and wonderful at the same time. "I have a proposition for you," Mr. Patterson said, sitting on a nearby chair. "The Belmont has been considering adding live music to our weekend brunches. Nothing too formal, just something to enhance the dining experience. Would you be interested?" Eliza blinked in surprise. "You want me to play here?" "Regularly. Every Saturday and Sunday from 11 to 2. We'd adjust your serving schedule, of course, and there would be additional compensation." He leaned forward. "It would be good for the restaurant. And I think good for you." The offer was unexpected but not unwelcome. The thought of playing regularly again made something light up inside her. But there was a hesitation too, a fear of what it might mean to fully embrace this part of herself again. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course," Mr. Patterson stood. "Take all the time you need, but know that the offer stands." After he left, Eliza remained at the piano, her fingers absently tracing melodies without pressing the keys. The restaurant had emptied now, the last of the staff calling goodnight as they headed home. She should leave too, she knew. It had been a long, emotionally draining day, but something kept her there, seated at the instrument that had once been the center of her world. Slowly, she began to play again. This time a simple piece she'd learned as a child, one of the first her father had taught her. The notes were uncomplicated, the rhythm steady and comforting. As she played, she thought about how much had changed in just one day. This morning, she'd been Eliza the waitress, invisible to the wealthy patron she served. Her talent and dreams buried under grief and practicality. Now she was Eliza the pianist again. Or at least she could be if she chose. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. When she finally finished playing and closed the piano lid, the restaurant was completely silent. She gathered her things and walked through the empty dining room toward the exit. As she passed the table where Richard Anderson had sat, she noticed his business card still in her hand. She paused, looking at it for a long moment, then carefully tucked it into her wallet. Whatever she decided about her future, tonight had shown her something important. The music had never left her. It had been waiting patiently all this time, ready for her to find her way back. Outside, the night air was cool and clear. Eliza looked up at the stars, visible even through the city lights, and thought of her father. "I played tonight, Dad," she whispered. "I really played." And somewhere in the quiet of her heart, she could almost hear him answer, "I know, Lizzie." I was listening. 3 weeks had passed since the night Eliza played at the charity event, and her life had taken on a rhythm as complex and beautiful as the music she now played regularly at the Belmont. She stood in the kitchen on a busy Saturday morning, watching the cooks prepare for the brunch service that would begin in half an hour. Her server's uniform hung in her locker, replaced today by a simple black dress that Mr. Patterson had deemed appropriate for the restaurant's new pianist. "Nervous?" Rosa asked, appearing beside her with a tray of freshly polished silverware. "A little," Eliza admitted. "It's different from the charity event. These people are just coming for brunch, not to hear music. Trust me, after word got out about your playing, plenty of them are coming specifically to hear you." Rosa grinned. "We've been booked solid for weekend brunch ever since Mr. Patterson put the announcement on the website." It was true. In the days following her impromptu performance, the Belmont had received numerous calls from guests who had attended the charity event, all asking if the piano waitress would be playing again. Mr. Patterson, never one to miss a business opportunity, had immediately created a new weekend feature, Brunch and Bach, though Eliza had gently informed him that her repertoire extended well beyond Bach. The transition hadn't been seamless. Some days Eliza still found herself reaching for her order pad when she arrived at work, momentarily forgetting that her role had changed. Other days she'd sit at the piano and feel a wave of insecurity, wondering if she was really good enough to be doing this professionally after such a long break. But every time she began to play, those doubts faded. The music was still there inside her, waiting to be released. "Hey," Rosa nudged her. "That guy from the symphony board is here again, 3rd weekend in a row." Eliza followed Rosa's gaze to the dining room, where Richard Anderson was being seated at a table near the piano. He'd become something of a regular, often bringing different people with him. Colleagues, family members, once even the symphony director herself. Today he was accompanied by a young woman who looked to be in her late 20s, with his same sharp eyes and confident posture. "Is that his daughter?" Eliza asked quietly. Rosa nodded. "Vince says she flew in from Chicago last night. Apparently she works for some big investment firm there. The daughter who had given up piano for business school." Eliza felt a flutter of curiosity, wondering if Anderson had encouraged her to reconnect with music as he'd suggested he might. Before she could think too much about it, Mr. Patterson appeared, looking harried but pleased with the growing crowd in the dining room. "Ready for your second official weekend as our resident pianist?" he asked. Eliza smiled. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Excellent. We're nearly at capacity already." He checked his watch. "You can start in about 15 minutes once most of the guests are seated." As Mr. Patterson hurried off to greet arriving customers, Eliza made her way through the kitchen to the small office that had been converted into a break room for staff. Her sheet music was stored there, though she rarely needed it anymore. Most pieces came back to her fingers naturally, as if they'd never left. She was sorting through her music when her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Break a leg today, sweetie. I'll be there by noon." A warm feeling spread through her chest. Her mother had come to every one of her performances since she'd started playing at the Belmont, sitting at a small corner table and beaming with pride. Sometimes Eliza would catch her wiping away tears during certain pieces, usually the ones that had been her father's favorites. With her music collected, Eliza walked into the dining room, now bustling with the pre-brunch crowd. The hostess was seating the last few parties, servers were taking drink orders, and the gentle hum of conversation filled the air. The grand piano had been moved from the private room to a small raised platform in the corner of the main dining area, positioned so that most tables had a view of the performer. As Eliza made her way to the piano, she noticed several guests nudging their companions and pointing discreetly in her direction. Word had indeed gotten around about the waitress who could play like a concert pianist. She sat at the bench, adjusted her posture, and placed her hands on the keys. Without any introduction or announcement, she began to play a light, airy piece by Debussy that seemed appropriate for a sunny weekend morning. The effect was immediate. Conversations quieted, though they didn't stop entirely. This wasn't a formal concert after all. Several guests paused with their coffee cups halfway to their lips, turning to watch her with appreciation. At a nearby table, a young child stopped fidgeting and stared at Eliza's hands with wide-eyed fascination. For the next hour, Eliza played a carefully selected program of pieces that created a pleasant backdrop for the diners without overwhelming the space. She moved seamlessly between classical selections and more contemporary compositions, occasionally mixing in jazz standards that her father had taught her. During a brief pause between pieces, she glanced around the room and caught Richard Anderson's eye. He nodded in acknowledgement, then leaned over to say something to his daughter, who turned to look at Eliza with undisguised interest. Eliza returned to her playing, but she was keenly aware of being watched by Anderson's daughter. What was she thinking? Did she resent Eliza for reminding her father of the musical career she'd abandoned? Or was there something else in that thoughtful gaze? Around noon, Eliza's mother arrived, taking her usual table in the corner. Eliza switched to one of her mother's favorites, Schubert's Impromptu in G-flat major, and was rewarded with a radiant smile. As the brunch service wound down, Eliza transitioned to her final set of pieces. She saved her own composition for last, the one she'd played at the charity event, the one she'd written after her father's death but never completed until that night. In the 3 weeks since, she'd refined it, expanded certain sections, and finally given it a title, After Silence. It felt right to end with this piece, her own musical journey from grief back to joy. As the final notes faded, there was a moment of complete stillness in the restaurant, followed by enthusiastic applause. Eliza stood and gave a small bow, still uncomfortable with being the center of attention but gradually getting used to it. She gathered her sheet music and stepped down from the platform, immediately enveloped in a hug from her mother. "That was beautiful. Sweetheart," her mother said, eyes shining. "Your father would have been so proud." "Thanks, Mom." Eliza returned the hug, then stepped back. "I need to talk to Mr. Patterson about tomorrow's schedule. Do you mind waiting a few minutes?" "Not at all. I'll finish my coffee." As her mother returned to her table, Eliza made her way toward the kitchen. She was halfway there when Richard Anderson stepped into her path. "Ms. Morgan," he said, "I wonder if I might introduce you to someone." He gestured to the young woman standing beside him, his daughter, unmistakably with the same confident bearing and direct gaze. "This is my daughter, Layla," he said. "Layla, this is Eliza Morgan, the pianist I told you about." Layla extended her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you. My father hasn't stopped talking about your playing since he heard you at the charity event." Eliza shook her hand. "It's nice to meet you too." Layla was quite accomplished herself. Before she decided to pursue finance, Anderson said, with a hint of something that might have been regret. Layla gave her father a look that suggested this was a frequent topic of conversation between them. "Dad seems to think it's not too late for me to reconsider that decision." "It never is," Eliza said. "Too late, I mean. I didn't play for 3 years after my father died. I thought that part of my life was over. And now I realize that music isn't just something you do. It's part of who you are. You can ignore it for a while, but it doesn't go away." Layla nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I actually started playing again a couple of weeks ago. Just for myself, not professionally. That's wonderful, Eliza said sincerely. I was wondering, Layla said, if you might be interested in getting together sometime, to play or just to talk about music. It's been a long time since I've had anyone to discuss it with who really understands. The request surprised Eliza, but not unpleasantly. I'd like that. They exchanged phone numbers, and after a few more minutes of conversation, Anderson and Layla departed. Eliza watched them go, reflecting on how strangely life could turn. The man who had once nearly cost her job was now responsible for opening new doors in her musical life. Later, as she and her mother walked home together, Eliza found herself thinking about all that had changed in just 3 weeks. She was still working at the Belmont, but in a role that honored her talent rather than hiding it. She'd reconnected with her music in a way that felt both familiar and entirely new, and she'd begun to build a network of people who valued what she could do. From Diane at the Children's Music Foundation, who had invited her to perform at their next fundraiser, to Richard Anderson, whose symphony connections were already leading to new opportunities. You seem happy, her mother observed, linking her arm through Eliza's. Happier than I've seen you in a long time. I am, Eliza realized. It's like I've been walking around half asleep for 3 years and now I'm finally awake again. Her mother squeezed her arm. Your father always said that music was how you spoke your truest self. I think maybe you just needed to remember how to listen. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. As they approached their neighborhood, Eliza's mind drifted to the folder of sheet music in her bag. Not just the pieces she'd played today, but new ones she'd been working on at home, compositions of her own that had begun flowing again after years of creative silence. For so long, she'd believed that her father's death had taken music from her life. Now she understood that it had been there all along, waiting for her to find her way back to it. Not as an escape from grief, but as a way through it, a path towards something new. The next morning, Eliza arrived at the Belmont an hour before her scheduled time. The restaurant was quiet, the dining room empty except for a few staff members setting tables for the day ahead. She went straight to the piano, sat down, and began to play. Not for an audience this time, not for tips or applause or recognition, just for herself and for the pure joy of making music. As the melody filled the empty space, Eliza closed her eyes and smiled. She was home.